everybody must get health insurance in order to ensure that healthy people are in the system too. Of course, the problem now is affordability. You can't require people to purchase something that they can't afford. So we have the third leg of the stool, which is subsidies for policyholders and insurers to make sure that everybody is able to buy into this system. A few other ACA provisions that will be of interest that I'll touch on briefly in a few minutes. It requires an essential health benefits package for everybody covered under a federal plan. One piece of this requires that insurance programs cover certain preventative care services without cost sharing. So no co-payments, no co-insurance. And that includes the contraceptive mandate that's been challenged in litigation under constitutional law objections for the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act and other provisions. So another piece of the ACA that I think we're going to see change very rapidly is the application of federal non-discrimination laws to healthcare providers that receive federal payments. This includes non-discrimination on the basis of gender, including self-defined gender identity. So what did the ACA actually achieve? We have 20 million people that are newly insured. This includes 12 million people who have now gotten insurance in individual marketplaces, and the others are in Medicaid. This has translated in states that did expand Medicaid to some real health gains. We've seen financial gains for hospitals and insurance, and we've seen in those states that adults are more likely to have a regular doctor, they're more likely to receive preventative care, they have higher self-reported health, and reduced emergency room use. So these are a lot of good gains in states that actually went along with Medicaid expansion and have functioning state marketplaces. There's also a report suggesting that about 20 to 50% of Americans may have a pre-existing condition that would ordinarily exclude them from the individual market. So this really has made a lot of difference for a lot of people. Yes, the premiums have been higher than many people have expected. This is in large part because the individual mandate has been somewhat weak and weakly enforced. There's also been some uncertainty about the federal commitment to funding subsidies for insurers. We can talk about that more in questions if you want. So the road ahead, there have been a lot of comments, or there have been a lot of statements by people in the House, people in the Senate, that people want to keep these underwriting reforms. They want to keep guaranteed issue, continue to make it possible for people to apply for individual insurance and not be denied by pre-existing conditions. But there is great resistance to retaining the individual mandate and these federal subsidies for purchasing insurance. So if this is the route of repeal, we may be left with a one-legged stool, which we've tried on 3 separate occasions, and it has not worked before. We've seen it with the initial adoption of an ACA provision requiring non-discrimination by pre-existing conditions for children, which caused a lot of insurers to exit the children-only market. We saw it in states that mandated coverage for pre-existing conditions, which saw premiums rise. And we saw it in state high-risk pools for people who could not be insured in the individual market. So there's a little bit of skepticism about how we can proceed with a one-legged stool, which seems to be what a lot of people are saying. So where we are now, when people talk about an immediate repeal, what they're talking about is budget reconciliation. So the ACA is a statute, and in order to repeal a statute, you need both houses and a presidential signature. Here the Republicans do not have a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate right now. So when they talk about repeal, they're talking about repealing the financial architecture of the law through budget reconciliation. Now this only requires a simple majority in both the House and the Senate. So what could be accomplished this way is a removal of the individual mandate that would become unenforceable, a removal of subsidies for Medicaid expansion, and a removal of federal subsidies and advanced premium tax credits for people to buy insurance. In 2015, the House and Senate both passed a version of budget reconciliation that would have done this. Obama vetoed it, but Trump is likely to sign it. That bill had planned a 2-year delay in the elimination of all this financial architecture. And if the current bill repeats that, that would set the time limit for actually adopting an involuntary replacement. If it stops there, if all we do is repeal the financial underpinnings of the law, the CBO has recently estimated that this would lead to a loss of coverage for 32 million people within the next 10 years, and a doubling of premiums on the individual insurance market. So there's a lot at stake in whether or not we're able to come up with a satisfactory replacement for the Affordable Care Act. So the details of the replacement plan They're a little sketchy right now. Trump just gave an interview to the Washington Post over the weekend in which he said that there would be lower costs, lower deductibles, insurance for everybody, great health care, much less expensive, much better, and people will be beautifully covered. But it's not clear what that will actually entail. So we can look at 3 different sources to figure out what policy provisions are most likely to be in this. So Tom Price has an Empowering Patients First Act, which he proposed in the House in 2015. Paul Ryan has his A Better Way proposal, also from the summer of 2016. And then Trump's campaign and transition website have given us some clues. So I think we're probably going to see 5 elements in these new plans, or in the new proposal. First, I think we're going to see a resurgence of themes of personal responsibility and internalization of healthcare costs to consumers or to patients. We're going to see this, for example, in the use of health savings accounts, which are tax-advantaged savings plans for healthcare expenses, which are typically coupled with a high-deductible health insurance plan, where you pay very low premiums, but then you pay a lot at the point of service when you access care. So the theory on that is that it's supposed to give us skin in the game. It will discourage waste, and it will encourage people to take care of their health behaviors. The problem with this that we've seen in previous work is that consumers are really sensitive to small increases in cost sharing, and they don't really distinguish very well between care that's medically necessary and care that's not. So these plans don't typically make people very much better off. People cut down on important care and unimportant care equally. Secondly, we're going to see more competition or encourage competition across states for health insurance sales, where people can buy insurance from other states instead of buying insurance that's regulated within their own states. This is intended to lift state-mandated insurance benefit requirements. The problem with that is that we already have this. This is already allowed under the ACA. It's been allowed for a long time, and insurers haven't really jumped into the interstate market. So I can talk about that more in questions. Another thing that I think we may see is a return to high-risk pools for individuals who have pre-existing conditions. This is intended to be a backstop for people who can't get coverage on the individual market. And those have not worked in the past because they've not been adequately funded. But if they were adequately funded, it would be a good backstop. Finally, we'll see changes to Medicaid and Medicare. There's a lot of talk of turning Medicaid into a block grant program, whereby states would define eligibility and benefits rather than having a federal floor or federal entitlements. There is an estimate that approximately 25 million people will lose health insurance under Medicaid if that plan does go into effect. Finally, the modernization of Medicare suggests turning Medicare for new enrollees into a voucher-based system for the purchase of care on individual exchanges. So those are some of the elements I think we're going to see, at least in the policy proposals. And finally, we may see a little bit more activity in terms of conscience clauses that allow providers to opt out of providing certain types of care. I think we'll probably see weakened non-discrimination protections, and that's in litigation right now. And Trump has also talked about encouraging more negotiation for drug prices, particularly in Medicare. So there's a lot underway. We've probably gone a bit over time, but I'm happy to talk more in questions about any of this.
All right. I want to encourage us to talk it into the microphone. Maybe I'll switch it to this microphone. Either I'm much louder or this is a better microphone. Oh, you have one too. Let's use this one.
Okay.
And I just want to flag something actually before Professor Wu speaks, is that Professor Underhill, you raised some issues that maybe we can talk about more in the Q&A, or I'll give you a chance to respond to before we open it up for questions about the politics. And so you talked about the politics in terms of the Senate and the House, and the fact that there are not enough votes to do this through a regular legislative process. It has to be done through reconciliation. So one of the things that I think is on the horizon are also the politics, the grassroots politics at the state and local level. In the beginning, you see the seeds of a lot of pressure being placed on members not to vote for repeal. So I hope we can address some of that before the Q&A. Professor Wu.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's loud enough, I hope.
Yep.
So this is a non-partisan panel, obviously, and we're working hard on self-control. But I will relate one anecdote related to this process and what to predict. I was in the White House the day after the election, and I was sort of wandering around, and what was the atmosphere? I guess stunned. People wandering around. I looked in one room, someone was just sitting on the floor. Like, people don't usually sit on the floor in the White House, just sitting on the floor cross-legged, like trying to meditate or something. And anyway, this an unnamed White House official, I was talking with him, and I said, well, what happens now? And he said, well, here we were sort of as if we were in a relay race, preparing for the handoff with the baton. And now it's as if we've thrown the baton into a pit of wild monkeys. And we have no idea what they're going to do with it. Maybe they'll run with it. Maybe they'll run in some completely other direction. Maybe they'll break it in half. And all these kind of policy proposals, we have no really good idea. I mean, some areas like what you're talking about, there's very clear Republican priorities. The president, the incoming president, basically backs some of those, say, some random things. But anyway, so in my areas, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about reading the tea leaves. And in all of this, I think there's an important difference between President Trump and the Trump administration. Administrations are massive. So I think over 1 million people working for the U.S. government. But even when we talk about leadership, there's hundreds of people. Many decisions, really important ones, never get near the president. And the incoming president, no one really knows whether he will have a bandwidth or interest in a lot of issues. Let's say ones like, that I'm interested in, like net neutrality, where he doesn't really seem to know what it is. So, there's this question of whether, and so I think the safer bet is betting on the Trump administration, and so far, with some exceptions, pretty much, like the right wing of the Republican Party, with some exceptions. So, I think that's usually the safer bet. The smart money is, at least the policy proposals, will be mostly what the further right wing of the Republican Party has wanted. Now, there's a little unpredictability, and occasionally the incoming president will say something completely at odds with the Republican Party orthodoxy. Like this negotiation on prescription medicines or trade policy. Trade policy might be the one where but in the other areas, it's a question of whether, all those people want to do, most of the people in power who are coming to power want to do what they want to do, and kind of might not care a little bit what the president wants, but they'll try to get it done anyway. They've been wanting to do these things for a long time. I think you see that in the presidencies, that people have pre-existing things they want to do, and if the president doesn't have strong feelings about it, they will do it anyway. They'll try to get their thing done. So let me talk about my areas. One area, when you look at tech policy, the area that had a big bullseye on it is the net neutrality rules, which I've been involved in one way or another in the last 10 years. So net neutrality rules are rules that say that the internet carriers have got to essentially behave like common carriers or utilities. They've got to carry stuff on their pipes. They can't block some content. They can't censor the web. Can't accelerate some stuff, slow down. They just got to behave themselves, cable and phone companies, when it comes to the internet. That sounds pretty reasonable. Nonetheless, it's become a Republican target for the last 10 years, mainly because, who knows why, but they have agreed with the phone and cable companies. So the big priority is getting rid, in tech, is probably attacking net neutrality. So the challenge is that it may end up being a little harder than the Republican Party or the administration would like. I don't want to get into the details of administrative law, but net neutrality is a rule that went through notice and comment proceedings and was upheld by a court. So in order to undo that, you have to do a whole new rulemaking proceeding, which takes a year or two at least, and then it would be challenged in court. And because they just did a rule, and because nothing has changed, I think the odds are that it would be challenging for the Federal Communications Commission by itself to undo it. So then it comes down to Congress, and now we face this really big question, which is, which Congress are we talking about? Are we talking about the Congress that for the last 8 years or so has been incapable of, would have trouble bursting its way out of a paper bag. It required passing a bill to do so. You've seen it fund itself through continuing resolutions, ridiculous things. They've been unable to do anything. And the question is whether Congress is suddenly able to pass bills, on a whim, whenever it likes. It starts doing these things, or whether it stays the way it was. Telecommunications legislation has a way of getting very sticky because as soon as you propose it, everybody wants something, and so I think that will also be harder. The other problem with the net neutrality repeal is there is something in your area, healthcare, there is at least some popular support for the idea that the Affordable Care Act was, I'm going to use socialized medicine, government takeover of the American way, and so. But there was a grassroots opposition. And the net neutrality thing, even among pretty diehard Republicans, they're like, okay, so we want a rule that lets the cable companies have more power. Why is that appealing? It doesn't have this thing where people can march against net neutrality. There's a couple paid-off bloggers who try to make it look that way, and those AstroTurf campaigns in Washington. But I've never seen any real grassroots opposition to net neutrality by people who aren't being paid off one way or another. And so I think, when it comes down to it, when Congress is like, okay, why are we spending a lot of energy on this? There is the fact that cable and phone companies will love them for it. But there's the problem is if it becomes a big public issue, the public is not on the side of that. So that's net neutrality. Second area of mine, which I spent a lot of time on, is antitrust. So the president-elect, during the campaign, made a lot of random comments about antitrust law. Now, antitrust is an interesting law for a person like the incoming president because he's known to keep enemies lists. A lot of his enemies are head of prominent companies. And if you want to kind of get a prominent company, other than auditing them with the taxes, the other thing you do is threaten to break them up, which is so it's kind of like a weapon against people you don't like. Supposedly, the incoming president doesn't like Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, and so he said to him, okay, we're going to break up your company. As if you just kind of snap your fingers and the company breaks. So that runs us into a really interesting question, which hasn't gotten that much media attention, which is the role of the president, the role the presidency plays in enforcement policy. So inside the White House, there is a strict ethical bar, and in some cases a legal bar, that prevents the president or the White House from interfering with individual cases. And so I think it dates, I don't exactly know the history of it, but I think it dates from the Nixon days. And so the president is not supposed to be, that person said something bad about me at the Golden Globes. Can you go audit her tax returns, to the IRS head, or like, I didn't like that guy, do you mind starting an antitrust investigation and try and get him thrown in jail? That happens in some countries. It's obviously not something you would hope would happen in the United States. Nonetheless, the president-elect has multiple times someone mentioned a merger. He goes like, that merger's going to be blocked. As if like it comes to his desk and he just starts blocked on it. So there's going to be this I think at some point that's going to, that particular tension between the incoming president's idea as to how government works and the general rule that prosecutors in cases are not to be interfered with politically, that is going to hit. Last thing I'll say is, and I've probably gone over as well, is on the relationship between the media and the president. This is an unusually, all presidents try to use the media, but this president is unusual in the sense that he seems determined, this incoming president, determined to be his own media outlet for one thing, and determined to always win the battle for attention no matter what happens. He even wants to compete with holidays. Martin Luther King Day comes down, he has to throw insults at a civil rights leader. Around Christmas, he started talking about nuclear weapons and how, it's like people are thinking about Christmas. There's always got to be about, the president and what he's doing. So he And the media feels they have to cover it. I mean, if the incoming president's talking about nuclear weapons, how can you not? And it just creates this incredibly challenging environment, and one which, at some level, with so much pressure on the press or manipulation of the press, is certainly putting some of the values of the First Amendment into stake. Not in a way that's necessarily judiciable, but in a way that is important for the future of this country. So I've probably said a lot. I'll say one little final thing. I mean, as I said, it's, nonpartisan situation, but you have to wonder, to have an incoming president with a 40% approval rating, seems to me like kind of a constitutional crisis, a mild one at least. The idea of the Constitution, if you read the Federalist Papers, was to prevent the country being dominated by factions. So there's some idea that you're not supposed to have a minority faction that takes charge of the country. But the president obviously didn't win a majority of the votes, and now doesn't, even before inauguration, which is like the period where everyone's like, okay, let's redevote ourselves to the American Republic and its ideals. The fact that they can't muster close to half the people to say this person is someone we approve as to be president is a hard question for the American constitutional system. So I'll leave it right there and turn to international things, which I think is even more depressing.
On that happy note, hello. So, can you hear me? Is this okay? Okay, this might be better. So I want to take a look at American democracy from afar, from the outside, and obviously that's what people around the globe are doing. As you know already from past elections, the rest of the world is keenly interested in what's happening in this country and how it might shape the world order. And I just want to spend a few minutes just thinking about what the perspective of the United States is for people around the globe. Look at it from the outside and then think about how a Trump administration might change that, also given the current state of the international order, which of course is a difficult one. So the United States is the oldest democracy in the world, and it has largely remained a beacon of democratic stability throughout its existence, with the major exception, of course, of the Civil War, even as other countries and entire regions of the world have succumbed to war, civil strife, totalitarianism, fascism, you name it, right? So if you just think we are commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution, if you think about China, if you think, of course, of Western Europe, and my home country, Germany, the upheavals these countries have gone through, and the United States has remained a democracy throughout. That has made it a model for people around the world. It has made it a model for aspirations that people that have become independent, that could start self-govern, like the people who came out of colonialism or totalitarianism after the breakdown of the socialist regime, they have looked to the United States in admiration and aspiration. The United States also has been a defender of major democratic values. In World War I, which is with its intervention there, of course, in World War II, and you could add a few other affairs where clearly there was not only self-interest and the assertion of global power, but also an attempt to defend international values. Think about the war in Yugoslavia and Kosovo in particular. And of course, the United States has always been a haven for individuals from around the world to come here and build their own lives and to find political freedom, economic prosperity, and just a better life. The U.S. has become an anchor for the international legal order since, of course, World War I, with the League of Nations, and clearly after World War II, with the building of the United Nations, with the creation of the Bretton Woods institution, with the use of the United States, US dollar as the anchor for the global currency, first pegged against the dollar in the Bretton Woods system, and then later on being the real anchor even as the US dollar was floating against other currencies. So the US is the anchor for the international legal order, the international economic order, the international financial order, and has been one of the major anchors for international global stability during the Cold War for sure. And after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, it looked, at least for a moment, that the United States would sort of become and remain the sole superpower. I remind you of the book, The End of History, by Fukuyama, which was written in the early 1990s. We don't have that sense anymore, but that was sort of the idea, and I think reflected very much how people from the outside looked at the United States. Now, clearly, we all in this room and in the broader world know that there was a lot of ideal, and not everything was real in these ideals that I just summarized. The United States' commitment to democracy and the rule of law has always been somewhat ambiguous, as you would expect with a major power. Domestically, there was almost the inkling of issues of class, race, gender, incarceration, and the tolerance of the growth of massive inequality. So at the beginning of the 20th century, the US was more egalitarian than Europe. It has become much more egalitarian since, and that has been tolerated in a system that still remained democratic and seemed to adhere to its values. Globally, the United States has been the anchor of global legal orders, and yet also has been the one major power that very often shied away from ratifying or even signing some of the major international treaties. The International Trade Organization was not ratified by Congress after World War II, of course. The United States didn't become a part of the Treaty of Rome for the International Criminal Court, etc. So it's not just being sort of the model leader on all these principles, but it always has been the upholder of the values that that support these principles. No other country has consistently advocated these principles globally and has at least made time again strides towards building them. So where are we going from here? There are, of course, quite a few people already who have sort of said that the American century has come to an end, and not necessarily with the Trump election, but it basically marks the final point in the end of the American century. There might be truth to that, but it's very difficult to make predictions in a world that is so uncertain. The famous acronyms that the American military coined in the 1990s, that the world is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, holds now even more than it did perhaps in the early 1990s when we look around. Now, having said that, if I want to make predictions against the backdrop of VUCA, I probably will fail. They ought to fail, but I will still say a few things. One is that I think the UCA will increase rather than decrease in the years to come. The US will be much less an advocate of legal ordering in global affairs. Its focus has become one of much more self-interest and to protect not the free world, which also was partly, of course, in self-interest, but it's much more narrowly defined self-interest. And that, of course, will reinforce a worrisome trend, I believe, that is already underway and of which the United States is a part. So it no longer stands outside, and I think that's the greatest shock for the world around us. It no longer stands outside, but it's part of a trend towards populist nationalism. And that has been rising in the world around us. Just think of India with President Modi, Turkey, President Erdogan, Russia, of course, with Putin, Hungary, Viktor Orban with the right shift of the Fidesz party, Poland, the constitutional and states crisis that is going on, and of course the UK and Brexit, and you can add, of course, the Euro crisis, etc. These are just things that already have happened. And what I want to say is that people who are on the side and are in support of the leaders that I just mentioned do view both Brexit, of course, and also Trump as a major victory and as a path towards where they want to go, and that is populist nationalism. The trend, of course, continues. Austria has been a near miss, if you want, with the recent doing of the presidential elections. We have a couple of interesting elections coming up in Italy and France, also in Germany, which we have to watch closely. The one really worrying thing that I find in this type of world is that there's no longer a strong voice out there with the kind of standing and influence and admiration that the United States used to have, probably still has, but people are puzzled, which would try to uphold the principles of a international order grounded in law and of values of democracy that is not only reduced to national populism, but has broader values, including civil rights and openness and transparency, that the US has done, even though, of course, it has never always lived up to the principles itself.
I was hoping we could ask each other questions, just one or two before, if that's all right. I have a question for you. And then maybe we'll, is that right? No, we'll just
That's perfect.
You know, well, the president-elect says surprising things sometimes, things that if they come from another politician, I might say, great. And healthcare is one of those at times. He said, I read this Washington Post review, and if I imagine I just took those words, I didn't know who was saying them, It's like we're going to have this healthcare system that's cheaper, universal coverage. I would have thought, well, obviously someone's going to make Medicare available to everybody or pay in or something like that. So I guess what I'm saying, is there a possibility of some surprises? Some areas where the Trump administration, or Trump himself, or something happens in